Do we need to do a mic check? No, we don't. All right. Well, it's my turn to say, well, good evening. Yeah, I am not Pastor John. He is here, but he is not teaching tonight. I am. So you can ask Kim why. You know, everybody does things that they get in trouble for, and then they have to make up for it. So I'm here tonight teaching, right, to make up for it. So, all right, I want to start with announcements. First of all, the big announcement is this Friday, we have Secret Church. And if you have not signed up yet, it is not too late. And if you don't sign up and you still show up, that's okay. You might not get a book, but you can still come for the study in the book of Ruth. And Pastor's already explained that Secret Church is a 6-hour study. So it starts at 6 p.m. But you can leave anytime you feel like you're not learning anything. And the standard thing is going to be that probably won't happen until midnight when it's over. So, this Friday, Secret Church. Yes, sir. Starts at 6, yes. 6 for 6 hours, lasts till midnight. Okay. Yeah, just like the pastor's sermon. Next Friday, that's this Friday. Next Friday, we have scheduled a special Passover observance on Friday evening, and that's 6:30 to 9:30. That's 3 hours. And that will include a dinner and a Passover observance together. And I want to tell you that since it's a dinner and we are cooking, we need to close the registrations so that we can buy the amount of food that we need to prepare everything for next Friday night. So sign-ups will end this Sunday. If you are not signed up by this Sunday, don't show up thinking you're going to show up at the dinner and there'll be food for you, because there won't be. However many people sign up, that's how much food we're going to prepare for. That's how many tables we'll set out. That's everything that's going to be. So for the Passover observance that starts next Friday, make sure you sign up. You can sign up tonight. You can sign up through Sunday. But after Sunday, that's it. That's when we'll be cutting everything off. And I have a couple of pieces to go along with that. That observance will be led by a special guest. His name is Dan Tuller. Dan Tuller did this here in 2019. So it's been several years since Dan has done it here, and he's coming back to do it again on next Friday. Dan's a Christian. He's been involved in lay ministry for many, many years. In 1995, God placed a burden in Dan's heart to dive deeper into the Hebraic roots of his faith. And as a result, it brought him into a study of the Passover and its significance. And so he and his wife have been practicing the Passover observance. He says that our first Passover observance was filled with the marvel of God and his amazing plan for man. We laughed, we cried, we ate unusual foods, we danced, and we worshiped. We couldn't wait to do it again. And now, over 2 decades later, Dan continues to lead congregations in understanding as believers what the significance of Passover is in our lives today. And so he will be here. He has led Passover services in church fellowship halls and in their home, in community centers, and he says even in an orphanage in Uganda. So it's our hope that this observance, this Passover observance, will likewise expand our understanding of Scripture in a similar sort of way. So that's next Friday, 6:30 to 9:30. Sign-ups will cut off on Sunday. I also have some special requests to make. Have you ever tried to have a dinner when you don't have a kitchen? That's what we're doing. We're going to have a dinner here, We don't have any ovens in the kitchen. So we're going to have to do some extra special stuff. And part of that means I'm going to ask people to sign up tonight and Sunday to be willing to cook items at home and bring them in so that we can keep them warm Friday afternoon and serve them Friday night for the dinner. And we have a menu, a set menu. The dinner menu is going to be salad with no croutons because we can't have anything with leavening in it, but a salad, marinated and grilled lamb and chicken kebabs. Does that sound good? Roasted Greek potatoes, stir-fried green beans, and pie for dessert because pie doesn't have leavening in the crust. Okay? So that's what we're going to do. And I'm going to need people who are willing to cook green beans or roast potatoes or make a salad. Now, don't worry, you don't have to be the only one cooking that dish. We're going to split it up so that we can have multiple people cooking, but you will need to bring it into the church on Friday afternoon, late Friday afternoon, so that we can have it for our meal that night. So if you would be willing to cook one of those dishes, I have a recipe. We'll supply you with the groceries. You will cook on Friday afternoon and bring it to the church. Sign up is out at the welcome table. So that's the first special request. The second special request is that we will have limited childcare for under 5. So bed babies and toddlers, we will have limited childcare. So when you sign up, you can request space that we have for that. So we'll do that. I would encourage you, because it's a 3-hour event, I would encourage you to arrange your own babysitters, because 9:30 gets kind of late. If you can do it, your kids are going to be home, they can be put to bed, those kinds of things can still happen. If you can't and you need childcare, we'll have limited capacity for that night. Okay, so that's the second thing. Third thing is, in addition to helping prepare the dinner, we're going to need to prepare this space for the event. So we're going to have tables set out, we'll need the tables dressed, and we will need people to serve, which means that we'll be bringing in all the cooked dishes and the dishes that are hot and plating them so that people can come by and just pick up their plate and go sit down so that the dinner doesn't turn into a 4-hour dinner. So if you can help with food prep, setup, or service, you can sign up. On the sign-up sheet, it says at the top, cooking, setup, service. You put down what you want to do, so then I can contact you to help out in that area. Okay? So questions about the Passover special requests. If you can cook, if you cook at home, you can cook for this event. I'll be cooking. That's kind of dangerous, scary for some of you, I know, but it's not that bad really. I'm a fairly accomplished cook. So I'll be making sure that the lamb and the kebabs are suitable for consumption. Any other questions about that on the announcement side? All right, let's get into May with our announcements. May 3rd and 4th, we have our EXO Marriage Conference. Here on the campus, is that right? Yes. Okay. Sign-ups underway, $30 per couple. See Dave Carnelli if you have any questions. And last announcement, all the way out to June 27th through 30th for the ladies' retreat. Still a few sign-ups. There are just a few left for the rooms. If you want to do that, you need to make sure you get that done right away. Any questions? See Pastor Gayla. She can help you with any questions related to that. Finally, we have announcements for the youth. Parents, you need to know these things. So we'll be doing the graduating high school seniors. That graduation event will be on Sunday, May 19th. So ask them what the plan is. Make them tell you if you've got one of those. And we'll do registrations for Master Camp. It's now open. Students that have completed grades 6 through 12. Camp is July 8th through 12th. So that camp is out in a little bit, but sign-ups are underway. You need to pay your $25 deposit to secure space for that camp. 60 months. Any questions on announcements? All right. Everybody got notes for tonight? Here we go. We're continuing our study, synoptic study of the Gospels. Tonight we get to focus just on 2 of them. So it's interesting that these stories are only told in 2 of the 4 Gospels. So we're going to look in Matthew and Mark at some passages. We're going to get to a passage that's going to have a link to our Passover meal next week. I would tell you I have a special prize for those of you who get where the link is, but I don't have a prize for you. You can just show everybody else how smart you are, that you figured it out. Okay, so we're picking up the passage, and in your notes, on page 3, there is a map. You know, when our gospel writers are writing all this stuff down, there's a lot of stuff that they presume we know. One of the presumptions is we understand the geography of where they lived. Well, we don't. And so this map is there to help us. If you turn to that map and you look at it, you'll see that there are little arrows. The lake is the Sea of Galilee. There are arrows down there. And then there's an arrow that goes up north to Tyre. That's arrow number 4. Here that Jesus leaves where he was, which was Gennesaret, and he goes to Tyre. What does that mean? Well, we'll see in a minute as we look at this passage. And then Jesus leaves there, and he goes someplace else. But without any context, it's difficult to know what that means. When you think about it, living in a time where people didn't typically ride horses or ride in carts or have animals for that type of work, everything was done basically on foot. You don't think much about the distances that are involved. These are some distances. So it'd be like saying, yeah, we left San Antonio and we walked to Austin. Well, that's an easy drive. It's not a particularly quick walk. So here we go. Matthew chapter 15, verses 21 through 28, and Mark chapter 7, verses 24 through 30. In blue, those are sections where passages are identical between the 2 Gospels. In green, they are the same information, although they may be in a different spot. And then anything that's not highlighted, it's different information. So some of these passages we'll look at together. As we look at them, we're going to think to ourselves, it's almost like 2 different stories. But it's the same story with different details in it. I can remember watching a daytime program when I was a kid. And it was a talk show, and they had a lawyer, a famous lawyer was on the program. And the host was talking to the lawyer, and they were talking about the law and what it's like to practice the law and those sorts of things. And all of a sudden, a man gets up in the audience, and he pulls out a gun, and he fires it. And everybody's obviously in shock, including the host. And the lawyer stands up and says, "That's not real. I'm going to make a point to you. Now that we've all seen this same thing happened here, I'm going to ask you some questions. What did the man say? How many shots did he fire? Who was he pointing at?" And in that crowd of people that just saw the event, there were different answers. So we're always listening and filtering and treating things differently. And it's no different in these gospel accounts. The writers have different motives for what they're writing down. And those motives influence what they write and what's important to them and the pieces that they keep. So, what do we say? Verse 21 in Matthew, verse 24 in Mark. And going away from there, which was Gennesaret, Jesus withdrew into the district of Tyre. Mark says, now Jesus stood up and went away from there to the region of Tyre. Sounds like he just got up and walked a short distance. But it's not a short distance. It's miles. And then Matthew makes a point of saying that, well, it was kind of in this area between these 2 towns. Mark doesn't provide that additional detail to us. And then he gets there, and Matthew's indifferent to what happens, but Mark tells us he entered a house and was wanting no one to know of it, yet he could not escape notice. The things that have been happening with Jesus as he has been on his ministry and his growing recognition by the crowds as someone who can work miracles is continuing to gain attention. The other thing this passage doesn't tell us, if you look at the map on page 3, you'll notice that in that arrow number 4 that leaves near the lake Gennesaret, you see a dotted line. And 4 goes across that line and goes out to the coast. That dotted line is the edge of Israeli territory. So Jesus, in his desire to escape the crowds, is leaving his homeland and going into an area that is not Jewish. And yet when he gets there, still hoping that things are going to be quiet, he could not escape notice. And hearing of him, a woman whose little daughter had an unclean spirit immediately came and fell at his feet. Matthew tells us she's a Canaanite woman from the region from that region came out and began to cry, saying, "Have mercy on me, Lord, Son of David. My daughter is cruelly demon-possessed." And once again, we probably miss some of the context of this. What are the words she uses to describe him? She calls him Lord. She calls him Son of David. What is Son of David a reference to? The Messiah. Who is the Messiah? He will be a son of David. He will be a descendant of that line. So this woman is a Canaanite. She's not a Jew. And yet, she understands who he's supposed to be. Not in his own country, out on the Mediterranean coast, far from Israel. But the crowds have been talking about what he's doing. Then it tells us, he did not answer her a word. And his disciples came and were pleading with him, saying, "Send her away, because she keeps shouting at us." Sound familiar? You ever been in a situation where someone's pestering you? Oh, those disciples. What brave, strong guys they are, right? This woman's hounding them. Send her away. Make her leave us alone. He said, "I was not sent except to the lost sheep of the house of Israel." What is Jesus saying about his ministry? Who is he there to minister to? The Jews, the lost sheep of Israel, the people who don't know better. And she is not a Jew. But she came and was bowing down before him, saying, "Lord, help me." Mark tells us she was a woman. Now the woman was a Greek of Syro-Phoenician descent. Matthew tells us that she was a Canaanite. Mark gives us some additional detail. And in fact, in all of those descriptions, she was a Canaanite, she was a Greek, she was Syro-Phoenician. All of those were ways for the disciples to say, she's not one of us. She's not a Jew. And the description gets a little harsher as we go down a little bit further. Jesus answered and said, "It is not good to take the children's bread and throw it to the dogs." Wow. Doesn't that sound cruel? Doesn't that sound mean? Doesn't that sound like something you wouldn't expect Jesus to say? But what did that saying mean? He's quoting her a common saying of the time. Who were the promised children of God? The Jews. And who was anybody who was not a Jew? They were a dog. So calling her a dog, in this sense, not actually calling her a dog, but saying, something about dogs is an indication between the children of Israel and those that are not children of Israel, those that are not Jews. So they would have said she was Greek, she was Canaanite, she was a Syrian heritage born in Phoenicia. All of those things would have been things that they would have said. And that's what Jesus says to her as well. Mark puts it this way: let the children be satisfied first, for it is not good to take the children's bread and throw it to the dogs. Now, the word that he uses for dog is not like a feral dog, not a wild dog, not a dog that would attack you. It's really like a puppy. A dog that you would have kept as a pet, that would have scrambled under the table, licking up the crumbs that fell off the table. And that's how the woman responds. She says, "Yes, Lord, but even the dogs under the table feed on the children's crumbs." As if to say, you may be ministering to the children of Israel, but in your ministry, there are benefits that are falling to us non-Jews. What a response. Is she offended? No. Think about the exchange Jesus has with the Samaritan woman at the well. What does he say to her? He says some pretty harsh things to her. And how does she respond? He's told me everything that's true about my life. This woman is not offended in hearing these words. She says, but even so, there's blessing available to me. Woman, your faith is great. How many times has Jesus commented about the great faith outside of the Jewish people? A couple of times. He says it to the centurion whose daughter is sick and in fact dies. And so the demon is cast out. In this miracle, Jesus does not make any hand motions. He doesn't say anything out loud. He doesn't say a word to cast out the demon. He just tells her, it's done. And the woman goes back, and her daughter is healed at once. What a testimony. And it's important, as we look at these passages, to keep in mind, what role did the woman's faith play in that miracle taking place? Because we're going to see some other miracles. But those miracles don't happen in exactly the same sort of way. And why is that? So, there's our map again. Arrow number 4, from Gennesaret up to Tyre, from Tyre to Sidon. And in our next set of passages, once again, the geography is left out on the details. Matthew chapter 15, verses 29 through 38. Mark chapter 7, verses 31 through chapter 8, verse 9. And departing from there, Jesus went along by the Sea of Galilee, and having gone up to the mountain, he was sitting there. Oh, hold on. So, first of all, he comes to Tyre. Now he gets ready to leave. That passage doesn't tell us anything about how he did it. Arrow number 4 is about 30 miles. He goes north. Now, if he's going back down by the Sea of Galilee, you'd think he went back along the way he came. But no. He goes north to Sidon. Then he comes all the way around and comes down the eastern side of the river, so that he stays out of Israeli territory as long as he possibly can. Why is that? Once again, he's trying to escape the crowds. Jesus is trying to move on the down low, and he goes through these extraordinary ways to do it. He comes back down, and you'll look at arrow number 6. From Sidon, he comes all the way back down to Decapolis. Decapolis literally means the 10 cities. So that's the region where there are 10 cities. That journey ends up being about 50 miles, 50 to 60 miles. So he's gone a long way to try and get away. He goes even longer to try and lose the crowds. He gets back down to Decapolis. And so that first passage in those two parallels really doesn't say anything about how long they walked, where they went, how far the way it was. All of that about the geography is presumed for us to be understood. And in verse 30, Matthew says, "And large crowds came to him, bringing with them those who were lame and crippled, blind, mute, and many others. And they laid them down at his feet, and he healed them." Mark focuses a little bit differently. He tells us, "And they brought to him one who was deaf and spoke with difficulty." That translation of "spoke with difficulty" really means mute. They pleaded with him to lay his hands on him. And Jesus took him aside from the crowd by himself. And he put his fingers in his ears. And after spitting, he touched his tongue. Now, that's not to say that he spit on the man's face, but Jesus turned his head to the side after putting his fingers in his ears, and he made a spitting. And then he touches the man's tongue. And what happens? And after all of that, looking up to heaven, he said to him, "Ephphatha," that is, "be opened." And his ears were opened, and the impediment of his tongue was removed, and he began speaking plainly. Now, what's different about this miracle compared to the miracle healing of the woman's daughter? Has to touch him. Touches him, and he has to say something. Be opened. Why is that? Was this a miracle that took extra effort from God to fix? Are there some miracles that take extra effort from God? No. God's got all the power he needs. What's the difference whenever we see a miracle take place? The difference is always what happens to the person that is being healed. What is their position? Jesus is able to heal people. Sometimes he touches them. Sometimes he lays hands on them. Sometimes he speaks over them. Sometimes he does nothing. Is it a function of his ability to heal? Is it a function of our ability to have faith? That's an interesting thing for us to think about, because God is still working miracles in our world today and in our lives. And when he goes to work those miracles in our lives, what hinders God from working his miracles? I'd suggest we do. It's our faith. It's our belief. The woman with the issue of blood wants only to touch the hem of his garment. And when she does, she's healed. Nothing else was needed. That was what her faith told her. In our lives, what does our faith tell us is needed for God to work a miracle in our lives? We're in a position to change that. We're in a position to open God's ability to work in our life through our faith. So we need to believe. We need to believe truly in the same way that the first woman believed. This person needed some extra effort and some coaching. At the end of that section, it says, the crowd marveled as they saw the mute speaking, the crippled restored, the lame walking, and the blind seeing, and they glorified the God of Israel. Mark says, and they were utterly astonished, saying, he has done all things well. He makes even the deaf to hear and the mute to speak. That's why we know that this man was a mute, because that's what the crowd commented on. It wasn't that he could speak a little bit. He couldn't speak, but now he can speak, and he speaks naturally and normally. I want to take us back to Matthew chapter 13, verses 54 through 58. Matthew tells us back there, coming to his hometown, he began teaching the people in their synagogue, and they were amazed. Where did this man get this wisdom and these miraculous powers? Isn't this the carpenter's son? Isn't his mother's name Mary? And aren't his brothers James, Joseph, Simon, and Judah? Aren't all his sisters with us? Where did this man get all these things? And they took offense at him. But Jesus said to them, a prophet is not without honor except in his own town and in his own home. And he did not do many miracles there because of their lack of faith. We impact those things in our life. And with our faith, a faith that trusts in God, that knows what God can do, that gives him the freedom to be who he is and do what he will. That's the power that we need to appropriate, God's power. Not God's power forcing him to do what we want, but the power to let God do what he wills in our life and not be inhibiting him. So our next section, Matthew chapter 15, verses 32 through 38, Mark chapter 8, verses 1 through 9. So you'll notice in this section, almost all of it is going to be parallel. And this is going to sound like a story that we just heard. Jesus calls the disciples to him. All of these people have come out. They've brought all these people to be healed. They've been together. Jesus says, I feel compassion for the crowd because they have remained with me now 3 days and have nothing to eat. And I do not want to send them away hungry, lest they faint on the way. And the disciples, remembering what happened just a little bit earlier, said, hey, we've got a few loaves and fishes. We can feed them all. Just work a miracle. No, that's not what they say. They say, where would we get so many loaves in such a desolate place? It's almost like they weren't there when he fed the 5,000. And so it's real easy sometimes to think, boy, those guys, they just never caught on to who Jesus was and what he could do. And Jesus said to them, how many loaves do you had? And they said, 7. Matthew tells us they had a few small fish too. Mark leaves that detail for later. So he directed the crowd to sit down on the ground, and he took the 7 loaves and the fish, and he gave thanks, and he broke them, and he kept giving them to the disciples, and the disciples gave them to the crowd. Sound familiar? It's not the same story. It's a different story. It's a different feeding of multitude. And they all ate and were satisfied. And they picked up what was left over of the broken pieces, 7 large baskets full. And those who ate were 4,000 men, besides women and children. Okay, it's real easy to be critical of the apostles for not getting it. What's nice is they never get used to the idea that Jesus is just going to work a miracle. Every time Jesus works a miracle, they are surprised. Can you imagine becoming so familiar and comfortable and expectant that Jesus will just work another miracle? That's the answer? Excuse me, that's a problem I have. He works miracles in my life all the time. I get to the point where I expect it. At least they weren't expecting it to happen all the time. That word that's used for large basket is used in the book of Acts when Saul has his experience on the road to Damascus. He goes into the town and he's kept until his eyes, the scales fall from his eyes and he can see again. And there are people who are after him. It says that Saul is put in a basket and lowered out the window. That's the same word for a large basket. In the feeding of the 5,000, it was a small basket. In the feeding of the 4,000, it's mentioned to be a large basket. There's more food left over here than the first time. Even though there's fewer baskets, they're bigger, much bigger. So, let's not be too critical of their failure to notice that Jesus is able to work miracles. Sometimes the same type of miracle, sometimes relatively close together, but they certainly don't expect it. Now they get ready to leave once again. Matthew chapter 15, verses 39 through 16, verse 4, and Mark 8, 10 through 12. And sending away the crowds, Jesus got into the boat and came to the region of, and we got two different names. Matthew calls it Magadan. Mark calls it Dalmanutha. They're both references to the same area. We don't know exactly where that is, but if you look on your map at arrow, squiggly arrow across the lake, number 7, from the Decapolis to Dalmanutha, that's south of Gennesaret. So now he's back on the west side. He's close to where he started from. So these passages have taken us in a big geographical loop, probably walked 100 miles, performing miracles, doing these things. So they get there. And when they get back into this part, which is definitely Jewish-controlled area, and the Pharisees and the Sadducees came, and testing him, they asked him to show them a sign from heaven. Now, I had no idea that a popular seagoing expression Jesus had used in the Bible. But here it is. But he replied to them, "It is evening, you say. It will be fair weather, for the sky is red. And in the morning, there will be a storm today, for the sky is red and threatening." You familiar with that? Red sky at morning, sailor take. Red sky at night, sailor's delight. Jesus is using that phrase. He's trying to tell the Pharisees and the Sadducees, you think you know so much. You're full of all this wisdom, right? You can predict the weather. But you can't tell what I'm doing? You don't see it? An evil and adulterous generation eagerly seeks for a sign, and a sign will not be given it, except the sign of Jonah. What's the sign of Jonah? Is he going to be swallowed by a fish and spit up on the shore? No, that's not the sign of Jonah. What's the sign of Jonah? What was Jonah sent to do? Jonah was sent to send warning. He was told to tell the people to what? To repent. He didn't want to tell them because he hated them, he didn't want them to repent. He wanted God's judgment for them. So what he's going to tell him is, what he's telling them is, loopity-loop. Okay. I can't use my left pocket because I'm left-handed. All right. So, he's trying to warn them that Jesus has come, and if he's going to give them a sign, the sign he's going to give them is a sign of repentance. That's the sign of Jonah. Do you think they get it? Good question. Well, it doesn't take Jesus long to say, okay, let's get out of here again. And coming to the other side of the sea, now he's gone from the west side of the lake to the east side, the east shore of the lake. And coming to the other side, the disciples have forgotten to bring bread. Now, we have so much to eat nowadays, we don't think much about it. But bread was the thing to eat. Bread was the food to have. For nothing else, people ate bread. So these fishermen get in a boat because, they're not used to traveling on lakes or anything like that. They're not used to sailing from one side to the other. And they don't bring any bread, except for one loaf. And Jesus said to them, "Watch out and beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and Sadducees." So now the apostles start to have a discussion about what Jesus meant. And they said, he said that because we forgot to bring the bread. And Jesus, aware of this, said, "You men of little faith, why do you discuss among yourselves that you have no bread?" How many times has he proven that he can feed thousands of people with almost nothing? Do you not yet understand or remember the 5 loaves of the 5,000 and how many baskets full you picked up? Or the 7 loaves of the 4,000 and how many large basketfuls you picked up? How is it that you do not understand that I did not speak to you concerning bread? So if he wasn't talking about bread, what is he talking about? Matthew tells us, "Beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and Sadducees." Then they understood that he did not say to beware of the leaven of bread, but of the teaching of the Pharisees and the Sadducees. Okay, how many people get the special prize? This is the connection that we have to the Passover meal. What is a key element in the Passover meal? Unleavened bread. Why was it unleavened bread for the Egyptians? Because they didn't have time for the bread to rise. They had to make a cracker, flatbread, quick. Get it on, get it off, get your stuff. Out of Egypt we go. But what is Jesus comparing the leaven to? Bad teaching, misunderstanding, turning God's word from a study and practice and worship of Him into religious acts, trying to determine what does it mean to be righteous. Judaism had become a list of laws that they used to declare people righteous, as opposed to righteousness that came from God. So that's the leaven. As we get ready to celebrate our Passover meal, keep that in mind, because we are going to be celebrating the unleavened bread. And there's a reason. There's a reason that that thing from so long ago still means something to us today. And here's a passage. They get to the other side, Bethsaida. And when they get there, they brought a blind man to Jesus and pleaded with him to touch him. So, now these are people who feel like if Jesus can just touch him, this man can be healed. And taking the blind man by the hand, he brought him out of the village, spitting on his eyes and laying his hands on him. He was asking him, "Do you see anything?" And he looked up and was saying, "I see men, for I see them like trees walking around." Then again he laid his hands on his eyes, and he looked intently, and he was restored and began to see everything clearly. And he sent him to his home, saying, "Do not even enter the village." So, once again, another miracle. Once again, this miracle took a couple of steps. Is that because Jesus didn't have enough bread on the boat? He was too weak from hunger to work this miracle? No. People come to him saying, if you will lay your hands on him, he can be healed. And what is it that this person that's being healed needed? He needed the two steps. He needed what he thought it was going to take to heal what he had. So, here we go. Questions about the passage. Questions about my challenge to you about what does it take for God to be able to work miracles in our lives? Does our faith play a role in that? Because he didn't want people seeing what he was doing, because the crowds were already so big. Every place he goes, thousands of people are turning out. Every time he tries to get away, even when he leaves his country and goes north into Phoenicia, the crowds are still following him. He comes back, he goes out of his way so that they might not know where he is, all the way on the other side of the lake from where they were, and there's still crowds, 4,000 men. 4,000 men would probably be 10,000 people. So he's still trying to keep what he's doing on the down low. And the evidence that the Pharisees and Sadducees are coming to him, demanding he do a sign, as if that's going to convince them. The biggest problem that Jesus has with the Jewish people, the Jewish leaders, is one of wrong expectation. Here the Messiah has come, but it's not the Messiah they're expecting. John the Baptist is in prison, and he has a question, and he sends his followers to ask Jesus, "Are you the one?" John's got expectations. Jesus is doing what his Father has sent him to do, but people are expecting something different. And Jesus' response to John's followers is, "Go tell John what you see. The lame can walk, the blind can see, The deaf can hear. The poor have the gospel preached to them. That's his proof of who he is. Miracles are done. People are coming from death to life. That's all the proof that's needed. His lineage, his birth, all of those things are the proofs that are needed. But the Pharisees and the Sadducees, they don't see it. They're wanting him to do what they want God to do. And that can be a challenging thought, that we might be missing what God is wanting to do in our lives because we're expecting God to do things the way we want them done. Other questions? Oh, I don't know. Why do you sigh? There's a strong sense in which that is a reflection of that. Because Jesus is like, nobody gets it. I'm here. I'm doing what the Father wants me to do. I'm performing these miracles. I'm doing all these things so people will know. All the proof is there. And yet, just as he has said, for the lost sheep of Israel, they don't get it. I'm finding people not of the lost sheep that have more faith. They're able to have miracles happen instantaneously, big things. All because they come to me believing that I can do it. These people, they want a sign as if that sign's going to be enough. Big groan. Other questions? All right. Well, thank you. We've got some, I keep putting my glasses on and making that popping sound. You got the questions there? Got a little time to look at them? Male mentors? Who's here? Is that you have a question?
I've got a really dumb, non-theological question. If the man was blind, how did you know what a tree looks like?
Well, you can describe things to people in such a way. And even walking around, he probably experienced transitions from light to shadow. Why did this get dark? You walked under a tree. What's a tree? It's a big, tall, straight thing. Yeah. Yeah. All right, you reminded me of a joke. So you've heard the story about the blind men that come across an elephant, and they're each feeling a different part, and they're describing the different creature, right? But the rest of the joke is, do you really know what an elephant is? An elephant is a mouse built to government specification. Okay. Too many government employees in the room, I can tell. All right. Any other questions? Male mentors. I've got a group. 1, 2, here we go. Thank you. Women mentors. Thank you. And you're standing in? Okay. And Spanish. Okay. And youth. Not youth. College and career. Okay. Back there. All right. I think I'm done.
Gus, thank you. Okay, no wonder you didn't want to